The summer had started like a dream. College classes were over, work was on pause, and three friends, Ryan, Emily, and Marcus, packed their bags for a road trip to the coast. They wanted beaches, late-night bonfires, and that warm, free feeling only a summer road trip could bring. After hours of driving, they came across a small coastal town that looked like it had been frozen in time. Old gas stations, weathered motels with neon signs that flickered weakly in the night, and narrow roads that bent sharply along the shoreline. It wasn't on the map, but the strangeness of it felt exciting. They pulled into a rundown motel that promised ocean views, even if the place itself smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. The clerk behind the desk hardly looked up from his newspaper, simply sliding the key across the counter with a grunt, his sunken eyes watching them with a strange intensity as they left. The room wasn't much, 2 creaky beds, a buzzing lamp, and a window that looked out over the dark, restless ocean. Ryan joked about how it looked like a set from an old horror movie, but Emily wasn't laughing. She had a bad feeling she couldn't shake, one that grew heavier when she noticed something odd scratched into the window frame, "Don't stay past midnight." She pointed it out, half expecting Ryan to laugh, but Marcus, usually the skeptic, frowned. They brushed it off, convincing themselves it was just some local kid trying to freak out tourists, but when night fell, the strangeness deepened. Around midnight, they heard footsteps outside their door. Slow, deliberate steps that dragged along the cracked concrete. Ryan thought it was another guest heading back to their room, but the steps didn't fade away. They stopped right outside their door. Then, after a moment of silence, came a scraping sound, metal against wood, like a key being forced into the lock. Emily's heart pounded as she rushed to deadbolt it, while Marcus whispered for everyone to stay quiet. The scraping stopped, replaced by a low, guttural whisper that none of them could make out. It lingered there for several minutes, until finally the sound drifted away down the hallway. They didn't sleep after that, just sat in silence, waiting for morning. When daylight finally arrived, they went downstairs to confront the clerk, demanding to know who had been outside their room. His blank stare sent a shiver down Emily's spine. "You shouldn't have stayed here," he muttered. "This place was shut down years ago." He pointed out the window toward the empty lot across the street, and when they turned back, the lobby was deserted, dust settling in the air like no one had stood there for decades. The friends looked at each other, their faces pale, realizing the motel they had checked into last night wasn't standing anymore. It had burned down 10 summers ago, with 3 young travelers inside who had never made it out. The drive out of that strange town was tense and silent. Emily sat in the back seat, clutching her phone, scrolling frantically to find some trace of the place online. There were no listings for the motel they had stayed in, no photos, no reviews, only a vague news article buried deep in a forgotten corner of the internet about a fire that destroyed a coastal inn in 2013. The article mentioned 3 victims, 2 men and a woman, all in their 20s, trapped inside their room as flames spread through the halls. Ryan kept telling himself it was just a coincidence, that the article wasn't describing them, but Marcus said nothing. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. They all knew it was too close, too uncanny to be random. The motel they stayed in last night wasn't supposed to exist anymore. The road twisted and curved, the waves crashing violently against jagged rocks below. The farther they drove, the more the town behind them seemed to vanish, as if it had never been there in the first place. By the time they reached a larger highway, Emily's phone had service again. She called her mom, forcing her voice to sound steady, but there was a shake she couldn't hide. "We're fine, we're on our way to the beach," she lied, not daring to explain the truth. How could she? How could anyone believe it? Her mom's voice cut in with static, her words breaking apart like the line itself was distorted. Emily frowned, pulling the phone from her ear, and her stomach dropped. The call log showed, unknown number. She hadn't called her mom. She had called someone else. Marcus pulled into a gas station to regroup, the kind of place that looked abandoned except for the flickering lights above the pumps. A lone figure stood near the far side of the lot, motionless, facing their car. Ryan waved it off, telling himself it was just another traveler, but the figure didn't move, didn't shift at all, even when the three of them got out to stretch their legs. Emily refused to look at it. She kept whispering that they should leave, but Marcus was already inside the store, trying to ask the cashier about the town they had just come from. The man behind the counter shook his head slowly. No town like that out here. Not anymore. His voice dropped lower, as if he didn't want anyone to hear. If you saw it, then it saw you, too. Ryan's laughter cracked through the tension, too loud, too forced. All right, enough. We're just scaring ourselves. We're tired, we need food, and that's it. Nothing's following us. But when they turned back toward the car, the figure across the lot was gone. The air felt heavier, suffocating, like something unseen was pressing against their chests. The friends climbed into the car without a word. As Marcus started the engine, Emily glanced at the backseat window and screamed. A pale face stared back at her from the glass, hollow eyes, skin blistered and blackened like someone pulled from a fire. She whipped her head around, but no one was there. The air inside the car reeked of smoke. They drove for hours without stopping, the sun setting into a blood-red horizon that seemed to follow them no matter how far they went. Every so often, Ryan swore he saw headlights in the rearview mirror, a single car trailing them at a distance, but whenever he blinked, it was gone. Emily refused to close her eyes, terrified she would wake up back in that motel room. Marcus muttered to himself, gripping the wheel like if he let go for even a second, they'd lose themselves completely. By the time they found a campsite along the coast and pulled over for the night, all three were trembling, exhausted. They tried to convince themselves they were safe, but as they sat around a small fire, they heard footsteps again, slow, dragging steps circling just outside the light. This time, they weren't at a motel. They weren't dreaming. Whatever had marked them that night had followed them into the real world. The fire at the campsite sputtered and cracked, its glow the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. Marcus sat closest, staring hard into the flames as though sheer focus could drown out the sound of those dragging footsteps. Ryan tried to joke, tried to say it was just an animal, but even he didn't believe his own words anymore. Emily sat stiff, clutching her knees to her chest, her eyes darting toward the shadows every time something moved. The footsteps didn't fade away. They circled, steady and deliberate, always keeping just beyond the light, like someone pacing, watching, waiting for the right moment to step in. Ryan finally snapped. He grabbed the flashlight from his pack and swung it into the trees. The beam sliced through the dark, landing on nothing but jagged trunks and tangled branches. His chest rose and fell sharply, relief flooding him, until the light caught something at the edge of the woods. A charred hand, blackened and blistered, curled tightly around a tree trunk before slowly pulling back out of sight. Ryan's voice caught in his throat, his hand trembling so violently the flashlight beam shook. Marcus lunged forward, knocking it from his hand, whispering, don't shine it on them." The woods went dark again, and the footsteps stopped. That silence was worse than the sound. Emily whispered that they had to get back in the car, to drive until sunrise, but Marcus shook his head. "If we leave now, we'll never make it," he said, his voice barely audible. "It wants us on the road." The way he said it, like he somehow understood, unnerved them both. He wouldn't explain what he meant, only kept staring at the flames like it was their last lifeline. The three of them sat there for what felt like hours, too terrified to speak. Then the smell hit them, smoke, thick and choking, rising around them as though the forest itself were burning. Emily coughed, waving her hands, but the fire in front of them was dying, not spreading. When she turned her head, her scream ripped through the night. Behind Marcus, just outside the glow, figures were standing, 3 of them. Their bodies were warped, half-burned, skin sloughing off in places, their eyes nothing but hollow pits glowing faintly red. And yet, they looked familiar. One of the figures had Marcus's build. Another had Ryan's face, half-melted, frozen in a scream. The last one, the woman, had Emily's hair, burned at the ends, her mouth twisted open like she was still gasping for air. Ryan staggered back, nearly falling into the fire. "No, no, no, that's not us, that's not real," he shouted, his voice breaking. But the figures didn't move closer. They just stood there, watching, their blackened mouths opening in unison to release a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite words. It was a distorted echo, like voices calling from inside a tunnel. Emily clamped her hands over her ears, tears streaming down her face. "They're us," Marcus whispered hoarsely. "That's what happens if we stay." In panic, Ryan kicked dirt over the fire, smothering it, plunging them into near darkness. The instant the light vanished, the woods erupted with movement, the dragging footsteps now a furious rush, circling closer and closer. Branches snapped, the sound of breathing pressed against their ears though no one was near enough to touch. Marcus fumbled for the car keys, yelling for them to run, and the three bolted through the shadows, the stench of fire following close behind. When they reached the car, Emily swore she felt hands clawing at her shirt, tugging her back, but Marcus shoved her inside and slammed the doors. The car roared to life, headlights blasting across the trees, and for a second, in the white beam, the figures stood directly in front of them, their burned faces staring through the windshield. Marcus didn't stop. He floored the gas, and the car tore through the empty campsite, the figures vanishing into smoke as the tires skidded over dirt and gravel. They didn't stop driving until dawn. When the sun finally broke across the horizon, painting the ocean gold, the three sat in silence, exhausted, their faces pale and hollow. Emily turned to the others, her voice trembling. "We have to go home. We can't keep running from this thing. It's not about the motel anymore. It's about us." Neither Ryan nor Marcus answered, but in their silence was the same realization. Whatever they had stumbled into that summer wasn't done with them. It was following. And it was only getting closer. By the time the car reached the edge of another small town, the sun was high and the world looked normal again, people walking their dogs, kids riding bikes, a bakery with its doors open letting out the smell of fresh bread. For a moment, it felt like they had escaped. Ryan even laughed shakily, clapping Marcus on the shoulder. "See? We're good. It's over." But Emily didn't laugh. She kept her eyes on the rearview mirror, watching the empty road behind them, convinced the figures were still there, just beyond sight. They pulled into a diner, the kind of place with vinyl booths and coffee pots that never seemed to empty. The three of them slid into a corner booth, trying to look like regular travelers instead of people running from something impossible. The waitress smiled kindly, but Emily noticed her eyes lingered on them a little too long, as if she saw something none of them could. She set down 3 glasses of water, and Emily froze. The condensation on the glass closest to her spelled out a word, as if traced by an invisible finger: "Stay." Emily shoved it away, her face pale. Marcus frowned, whispering for her to calm down, but then he saw his own glass. The same word appeared there too, letters dripping into the water. Ryan laughed nervously, brushing it off as a trick of the ice, but when he reached for his glass, it was ice cold, so cold it burned his skin. He yelped, pulling back his hand, and Emily saw a red mark forming across his palm. Not a burn from cold, but a blistered line, like scorched flesh. The three bolted from the diner, ignoring the waitress calling after them. They piled back into the car, but the sense of safety was gone. The world outside still looked normal, bright, sunny, ordinary, but something beneath it was cracking. The further they drove, the more things began to warp. Houses they passed had windows blackened by soot. Cars on the side of the road looked rusted, charred, like wrecks long abandoned. And yet, when Ryan blinked, they were whole again. It was as if 2 realities were overlapping, one of life and one of death, and they were caught between them. Marcus finally pulled over near a cliffside rest stop overlooking the ocean. He killed the engine and sat there, breathing hard. "We need to figure out what it wants," he said. We can't just keep running. Running makes it stronger. Emily shook her head, her voice cracking. We're not supposed to figure it out. We're supposed to die there. That's what those things were. Us. Burned alive. That's what already happened. Ryan slammed his fist against the dashboard. No. We're still alive. We made it out. We're not them. But as he spoke, his words trembled, like even he didn't believe them anymore. The air in the car grew heavy again, filling with the acrid stench of smoke. A faint hiss echoed from the vents, like a draft, until the car itself filled with a thin, gray fog. Emily coughed, clawing at the handle, and Marcus shoved the doors open. They stumbled out, gasping, as the car alarm suddenly blared, the headlights flashing wildly. Through the windshield, they saw it, 3 shapes seated calmly inside the car. Their shapes. Their burned faces, staring straight ahead, mouths opening in perfect unison as though screaming, though no sound came out. Emily's legs gave out, and she fell to the ground, trembling. Ryan dragged her up, shouting for Marcus to move, but Marcus didn't. He stared at the doppelgangers, his face blank, as though transfixed. Slowly, he whispered, maybe this already happened. Maybe we're just catching up to it. His eyes glazed, and before Ryan could stop him, Marcus walked back toward the car. The figures inside leaned forward at the same time, pressing their blistered hands against the glass. The car door creaked open, though no one had touched it. Ryan grabbed Marcus, yanking him back, and for a moment the illusion shattered. The car was empty again, silent, still. But Marcus was shaking violently, his skin ice-cold. Emily screamed that they had to leave, that staying here was only making it worse. Ryan shoved Marcus into the back seat and floored the car back onto the highway, heart pounding as the road stretched endlessly ahead. Behind them, in the rearview mirror, the ocean cliffs shimmered with heat, like they were already burning. The highway seemed endless, cutting through the coastline like a scar. Ryan's hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, afraid that if he blinked too long he'd see something else, faces in the rearview, figures on the shoulder, flames in the sky. Emily sat in the front, her voice hoarse from crying, while Marcus lay slumped in the back seat, whispering incoherently. His words came in fragments: fire, can't breathe, already gone, and Emily gripped his arm, begging him to snap out of it. As the miles passed, they began to notice something strange. No other cars were on the road. No trucks, no headlights in either direction. The towns they passed were silent, their gas stations closed, their windows boarded up. The world had gone quiet, like they were driving through a ghost of summer highways that should have been bustling with travelers. Ryan muttered under his breath, "We're not in the same place anymore." Emily wanted to argue, but deep down she knew he was right. Then Marcus sat up suddenly, his eyes wide and glassy. He pointed to a faded green road sign ahead. It read, "Silver Coast Motel, 2 miles." Ryan's stomach turned to ice. Emily's breath caught. That was the same motel. The one that had burned down a decade ago. Ryan pressed the accelerator harder, determined to pass it by, but the road twisted like a loop, curving back toward the coast. No matter how fast they drove, the sign appeared again, and again. Each time, the distance grew shorter, 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile, until finally the motel itself rose ahead of them. It stood whole this time, not burned, its neon sign buzzing faintly, its windows glowing with warm yellow light. It looked inviting, alive, as though the night they'd spent there had never ended. Marcus leaned forward, a fevered smile spreading across his face. "We're supposed to go back. That's where it ends. That's where we belong." Emily screamed at Ryan not to stop, but Ryan's arms felt heavy, his hands stiff. The car slowed on its own, the brakes pressing down as if controlled by something else. The gravel crunch beneath the tires was deafening. They rolled into the lot, the same cracked pavement, the same salt wind from the sea. The office door creaked open, and the clerk stepped out, his face shadowed but unmistakable. "Room's ready," he rasped. Marcus was already opening his door, stumbling toward the man like a sleepwalker. Ryan grabbed his arm, shouting, but Marcus turned to him with empty eyes. "You can't fight it. We already died here. We're just repeating it." His words were calm, resigned, like he'd accepted something the others couldn't. Emily bolted out of the car, running for the road, but the darkness swallowed her after only a few yards. No matter which way she ran, she ended up back in the lot, her screams bouncing off the walls of the motel. Ryan chased after her, but the heat hit him first, the wave of suffocating, scorching heat as the motel windows burst into flames. Smoke poured out, curling into the night sky, and the clerk vanished into the haze. Marcus was gone too. They could hear him screaming inside the inferno, his voice joining the echoes of others who had burned there before. Emily fell to her knees, clawing at the pavement, while Ryan tried to drag her back to the car. But when they turned, the car itself was already on fire, flames licking through the windows, the same three burned figures sitting calmly inside, watching them. Emily's body convulsed with sobs as Ryan pulled her close, his own tears streaming down his face. Around them, the world twisted into fire and smoke, the motel collapsing, the sky itself glowing red. It was the same night, repeating, unending. And deep down, Ryan understood the truth. They had never escaped that first night. The trip, the road, the diner, the bridge, it had all been illusions, fragments of a final summer repeating endlessly. They had died in that motel fire, and now their reflections, burned, hollow, screaming, had claimed them.